Spent an hour yesterday with Kansas City civil rights leader Alvin Brooks, a guy who, has been a figurehead in this community for the better part of 60 plus years, give or take. 92 years old. My buddy David Block is going to be featuring him in Kansas City Magazine in a 9/90 feature they are rolling out this fall. They asked me to help out with that. So we sat down with Alvin Brooks yesterday. And he had some tremendous stories about race relations in this community, growing up here in the 40s. Born in 32, by the way, but just interactions in the 40s he had with, law enforcement and things like that, and things that were happening all over the country, including here in Kansas City. But, he was one of the first black cops in Kansas City history, then became a teacher, and then became a civil rights leader, founder of Ad Hoc, and, the rest has been history. Very influential figure in Kansas City. He's 92. He was married for 63 years, 6 children. Oldest was a son, then 5 girls. And, as far as everyone can tell, has lived an honest, noble, humble life here in Kansas City. There are movies that are being apparently made about his life, and he's still doing great at 92. So I want to play some of our conversation. It's going to be for the magazine, but I recorded some of this conversation. We were sitting in a conference room down on the plaza yesterday, and, we got into race relations and how to improve things in Kansas City and around the country in the urban core, and he was saying things that others in his shoes have not been willing to say.
That Missouri is the highest per capita black male homicides in the country. Last year, 182 homicides. But 157 were black men. Does anybody care about that? I cannot believe if there are 182 homicides and 157 were black or white male, somebody would say something about it. And I get perturbed at my own group when a police officer killed one of us, and we raised all kind of hell. When we killed each other, it's sort of like, well, that's what we ought to be raising hell about.
That's what we ought to raise hell about. He says there at the end, I get perturbed when my own folks, referring to black Americans, raise hell when a cop, referring to, Derek Chauvin and George Floyd, kill one of us, and we raise hell. When, as he notes, we kill each other, we don't do anything, and that's what we should be raising hell about. He's right. The vast majority of homicides in Kansas City are black men. About 70% is, I believe, the number. And black men are about 15% of the population in Kansas City and 70% of the homicides. But they're also killed 99% of the time by other black men. And he's noting that. And he's like, hey, it's one thing to raise hell. Not that we want cops innocently killing black men anywhere, but we're not raising hell about what we're doing to each other. And this is a guy who dealt, and he told us stories yesterday, dealt with legitimate racism as a teen from white officers in the 40s here in Kansas City. Told me a story how, he was riding his horses around Kansas City, horses his family owned, with his fellow black friends in the 40s. White cops come up to him and they assume the horses are stolen, and they gave him all kinds of hell and, attacked one of his buddies and the whole thing. I mean, that's legitimate racism. And he goes on to put his money where his mouth is, becomes a cop. By the way, the racist cop who was berating his buddy that day and beating up his buddy, he worked with on the force. He had incredible stories, but he also admitted right there, we're killing our own at an exponentially high rate, and no one's protesting. George Floyd happens, and everyone's wanting to burn buildings down. And then we got into how you solve the cycle of violence. And he talked about an important thing, education. But you will hear me ask him in this next clip. It's a couple of minutes, so you're going to have to wait for my question. Where we're sitting in this room yesterday on the plaza, in this conference room, And he's talking about education and improving education in the urban core. And I had to ask him a question that I've been dying to ask somebody like him of his stature and his credibility for a large part of my career.
But I'm convinced the only way you reduce crime and violence is reducing poverty. And the only way you reduce poverty is increase education. I remember sitting in that old black junior college when Brown versus Board of Education was handed out reversing Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. And Dr. R.T. Bryan, a brilliant educator, told us in the junior college, all black students, young people, if white America does not accept what's going on in this decision, 50 years from now, we'll be in the same situation. That was 1954. 2024, segregation in public education.
I'm going to stop right there and continue, but he says segregation is part of public education, and I don't disagree with him at all. But that's because your zip code determines where you go to school in the public education system. I mean, any black person can move to Overland Park and send their kids to Blue Valley, right? But you have to get yourself to a point where you're going to a school district and living in a place where you can go to your Blue Valley school district. It's not segregation in the sense that you can't go. It's economic segregation that we're living through. And the teachers' unions and the public education system has encouraged this. They have discouraged school choice. But you go to the urban core, any parent that wants to see their child succeed is trying to get them out of the public education system. It's not about money. It's not about investing more government dollars into these urban cores and, from a public education perspective. That's not the answer. It's how do you create environments where people who truly want to learn, who want to be taught, who want to, have their children have a better future. How do you get them in the schools where people care and they can learn instead of being in glorified daycares and prisons?
Still exists. And so you talk about urban education, where kids are not performing as high as a suburban education or private parochial school. And nobody cares about that. The formula is that you, to reduce crime and violence, you got to educate folks. Studies have been done to show that young people who graduate from high school are less likely to get pregnant or get somebody pregnant, less likely to get into drugs and gangs and those kind of things. And so I guess it's because my IQ is about 500 and everybody else is that high, nobody sees that but me. There's a correlation between poverty, crime, and education.
Where does family structure factor into that?
Oh, it's a foundation. And we have to talk about that within the black community. Too many single heads of household, women trying to be mother and father. And I have to quickly say that so many cases, single black mothers do great jobs with little black boys to grow up to be men. Mm. But the odds are against them. And that's what we need to be preaching from the pulpit. Mm-hmm. Those kind of things. That's why sometimes I think maybe I just ought to stay at home and not go to anybody's congregation.
That was part of the conversation yesterday with Alvin Brooks. Poverty, crime, education, yes, are all intertwined. But as I've been dying to ask somebody of his stature for years, where is the family structure in all this? And he said, admittedly, he's right. It's the core of everything. When you put people in the single-parent households, regardless of their race, they are exponentially more likely to live in poverty and then get into a life of crime and not care about their education. All these things intertwine. And as Alvin Brooks rightly pointed out, even though I think I might have had to get him there, the family structure is the core of everything. Before the government, before poverty, before crime, before education, the family structure is the basis of everything. And there's no government spending that can correct not having the core properly stabilized.